Thank you. You're just applauding my title, aren't you? I made that up specially for you. So what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about some of the macro trends that are driving everything that we're doing in this room and elsewhere. So, oh, good, the animations are working. Excellent. So we're living in exponential times. Now we're used to thinking in linear times, but we're actually living in exponential times. And what I mean by that is the rate of growth of how technology is changing and being adopted is growing exponentially. So way back from the agricultural revolution, oh, some of those didn't quite work, never mind, to the industrial, it was about 8,000 years. Then about 120 years onto the light bulb, and we could get into debates as to who invented the light bulb, but obviously you hear my accent and you know that I have a particular view. But then onwards to the moon landing, and then only 22 years from then, we had the first iteration of the web that came out of CERN and all of that. Just a few years later, 12 years later, we'd worked out the human genome, and then to where we are today, a few years back, we started commercial space travel and 3D printing, and Watson came on and beat some humans at a very intellectual game, and it's just growing on and on from there. So as these things are changing, technology is keeping pace from a computer environment. Here we go. So as this pans up here, and what I want to talk about is how we're transitioning from really a material economy to an ideas economy. And technology is moving at such a pace to keep us up with that. So you see here, these little lines on the side here, that shows how many transactions you can perform for about $1,000. So a few years ago, 2010, and around the time of the Pentium 3, when that came out, if you remember that, that was about the same amount of transactions on that silicon as you'd find neural network connections within an insect brain. Just last year, with a lot of the stuff that came out of Apple and others, we had about the same connections for $1,000 as a small mammal's brain. If we take that a little bit further forward to 2023, for $1,000, if Best Buy still exists at that point, you can go down and buy a computer that'll have the same amount of transactions per second for $1,000 as a human brain. Now, taking that forward to around 2045, and depending on your view of the singularity, whether you read Ray Kurzweil and all of that good stuff, for $1,000, you'll buy something that has the same amount of transactions as all the human brains on the planet. So what does that mean? That means everything is changing much faster than we thought. That brings about the whole growth of transistors that are out there. In fact, let's move on. So the internet was spawned out of this massive growth. And right now, today, a child in Africa, if they have DAS and they have connectivity, their cell phone gives them more access to more data than Clinton did when he was in the office. And there's more processing capacity in one of these than the NASA team used to send a man to the moon. It's just dramatically changing everything. So on that scale, we're looking at how connectivity and connectedness. So about 2010, we had just shy of 2 billion connected people on the planet, and around, 800 million connected people and just shy of 2 billion devices. Last year, we had about 4 billion devices and about 2 billion people. By 2020, we'll have anywhere between 7 and 9 billion connected people. It depends on how far Google get and Facebook get with all their drones and Loon projects and such. But when we start looking at the devices that are connected, all the devices that are going to need to be connected via our infrastructure, yours and our infrastructure, we have to change the scale because it's going to be anywhere between 40, 55. I heard a report just the other day, it's about 1,000 connected devices. Everyone's just jumping on this. But in just 4 years, with what's happening in the world, there's going to be so much need for traffic. It's going to break everything that we understand. So the internet, it's really the ultimate democratizing technology and also business disruptor. If you think back just a few years, you had the brick and mortar businesses and you had the services businesses. They've pretty much been displaced by technology. There's very, very few bookstores out there. There's virtually no record stores except for the vinyl that the DJs will want to go and buy. Craigslist is killing the the classified ads for the newspapers, and the telephony companies are struggling with their landlines. I mean, trying to get I remember my daughter showing me over the Christmas break, I think it was Verizon, oh sorry, I think it was from Verizon here. They had this great ad talking about how they were doing so many minutes free in voice for the millennials. And we just saw this last week where um, T-Mobile have come out with a data-only plan. Millennials aren't interested in doing voice. For those of you who have kids, when you call them, do they ever pick up the phone? Or they just say, why don't you just text me? Drives me crazy. Anyway, so I'm get off my lawn, getting to be an old man. So let's talk about some of the technology and the disruption. If you go back to the mid-70s, Kodak, a guy called Stephen Sasson, invented the digital camera. Great technology, is about 0.1 of a megapixel, hugely expensive, had to store the image on a digital tape. It's excellent. At the time, Kodak were the largest chemical and paper manufacturer in the world. And they said, that's interesting, off you go, stay in the lab, keep going, we're quite happy with what we're doing. So they had a huge market cap, 140,000 employees around the world. And that was how things were for quite a few years until everything changed in 2007. Two major things happened there. Apple introduced the iPhone, and also Nintendo introduced the Wii. Now, what that did to the factories of the world, who were already starting to play with robotic placement of silicon and diodes, it enabled a whole shift in economies of scale. We started to see the very first MEMS devices, the microelectronic mechanical switches. And because of that, it launched a whole industry. Alibaba grew up, the ability to go out and buy a device, which, let's say, what was it, about 23 years ago next month, the Magellan GPS device came out onto the market. It was about £3,000, about $3,000. Now you can buy a GPS chip for about 150 cents. It's $1.50, $2, and obviously a lot cheaper if you buy in bulk. So that changed everything. Also with the Apple iPhone, it had a camera in it, just a 2-megapixel camera. And a couple of years later, a couple of enterprising guys, 3 guys in a garage, launched a product called Instagram to monopolize that. So now there's a way of sharing all these images that were being taken by so many people around the world. Now, the impact of that was that 2 years later, Kodak, this huge industry that had invented the technology, went out of business. They filed for bankruptcy. They've since emerged, but they're just selling to the professional markets, to the Hollywoods and the film industry. And then later that year, these 3 guys, they've expanded to 13 people in their garage in a small office. They were acquired by Facebook for $1 billion. So what does this tell us? There's some great quotes here. John Chambers is quoted, he's actually using someone else's quote, but in 10 years, it's predicted that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies will be ones will no longer exist. So you must disrupt to survive. And by 2020, 3/4 of the S&P 500 will be companies you've never even heard of. So think Facebook, one of the biggest companies in the world now. It wasn't around 10 years ago. Google's still fairly new, but it's just extraordinary what's happening. So let's go back to the internet. So it was designed on post-war telephony technologies, as Doug was saying. Oh, those animations have gone crazy, haven't they? Never mind. So that was supposed to represent bits of data traversing the country, because as it was designed for email, as you know, the internet breaks things up into packets, they all pass around, it gets recompiled at the end, which is not a problem for email. But if you're doing video, that's a real problem. Also, it's not in enough places. So we talked about those primary 9 to 12 key hubs around the country. Each one of those is surrounded by a campus of data centers. That's where most of the internet lives, that's where the cloud lives. And then you get the large mega clouds in the Oregon basin and also down in North Carolina. But again, not in enough places, particularly because the traffic that's being passed on the internet has changed dramatically. At peak, at any time in the world, 70% of that traffic is now video. And you see some of the figures there. Like Netflix is nearly 40% of the traffic. And that causes major issues for the cable companies and also the cell companies because the millennials aren't sitting at home watching Netflix, they're watching them on these. So again, this is why your industry is so vital to the future. So, stop driving, here we go. So not only that, but streaming and esports has changed everything. Last year, more than 50% of live traffic was from one company, Twitch. So if any of you have got anyone in your household that's anywhere between probably 4 and 16, they don't spend their time watching ESPN for sports. They're watching people play Minecraft or World of Warcraft being streamed live on Twitch. Oops, daisy. And also the broadcasters are changing. Facebook, 1 billion people hit Facebook in one day last year, and it's just grown on from there. That was the peak. Twitter has changed everything with Periscope and Meerkats, where you can stream, in fact, as we're streaming here live. YouTube, 300 hours of content are uploaded every minute, and that's just growing. In fact, those numbers are old now. Dude Perfect, you've probably seen the videos of those guys with basketballs, throwing basketballs out of office windows or off of helicopters, getting into making baskets. They have more traffic on their one site than ESPN does. In fact, Disney encouraged ESPN to take their site down to try and revamp it because of that. And as Doug said, wireless is growing exponentially as well. So we'll see that Kansas, in just a few years, will consume more data than Los Angeles did in 2013. And you see some of those figures there, which I can't read without my glasses on. But yeah, this area here, New York, by 2018, will consume nearly half of the traffic of the whole country just a few years ago. There we go. Okay. So localization, what does that mean? So some of these are all public information. Amazon estimates that they can lose a percentage of traffic of their revenue just because of latency. And you can read all the others there. I won't go through it for time here. But this is a huge issue for companies that derive their income from advertising revenue. Akamai have done many studies around video quality and how after about 3 seconds, most of the millennials would just switch off. If they're getting a low quality stream, we've all experienced the spinning wheel of death, I'm sure, with Netflix. When we're trying to watch something, we see the very low quality, then it starts to give us the information that we're looking for, the program starts. But after about 2 or 3 minutes, it may stop again and rebuffer. I'll suffer that for probably twice, and then I'll just switch over to something else and revert back to the linear streaming. And then there's some great white papers we have out on our website that have been brought together from Sam Knows and Conviva. But let's look at Conviva in particular. Conviva provide data to the cable companies and the broadcast companies, and they came to us because they noticed in one of our regions that where we were the origin for some traffic. As the traffic in that whole region had gone up by 11%, rather it had gone up significantly, traffic originating in our site, I'm running out of time, aren't I? I'm rushing. Traffic from our sites, the quality had gone up 11%, but the whole region had gone down by 2%. So they came to us to try and analyze what that data was all about. And they found that because we'd moved the origin servers within the market, the latency to the end user had gone up dramatically. So I was just going to talk about edge data centers, but that's more of a plug. So let's just skip on to this. So what we do is we enable that content to be deeper in the region by working with the anchor tenants who are generally the cable companies or the content companies, and we decide to build these larger than a CO, but smaller than a large data center within those markets, sitting on top of a bunch of fiber, but designed specifically to cater for these larger data stores. So up to 20 kilowatts of power per cabinet, enabling the local peering to occur in the market where it needs to be, and the content to be distributed accordingly. So I think I've gone over my time, but anyway, so that's what I was just going to say. The future of video is the internet. The future of the internet is video. Internet of Things is going to change things dramatically. Everything that's happening in this conference, the DAS, the Wi-Fi, needs to be tethered back to where these content caches reside so they can be delivered accordingly and keep our customers very happy. But I'll stop at that.